Welcome back to Music and Stories, the stories of my life, Chapter 7. Well, I think I'm going to call this chapter Reckless Youth. But we'll get to the reason for that soon enough because previously, my life was at a low point. It was my least favorite year. Most pressing of all was the tension in my house as my parents headed for their inevitable divorce. It was awful there. They argued all the time, and I developed colitis because between that and my inability to get into a good school, my life was hell. And through a Hail Mary pass, I got into Franklin and Marshall College, having given a good interview. And riding home from the college with my dad, I realized I'd be spending 4 years at a place that I didn't want to be in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, studying a subject I cared very little about, which was psychology. And film school and learning about making movies was way in the distance. And that's where will leave me because I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about serendipity, synchronicity, luck, chance, how things in your life connect without you even knowing it. And that's really fascinating to me because as I get older, I see how the pieces put together. It's like when I was doing Heroes, some of the characters had these string drawings and these string things that they put up that showed how all the characters with superpowers, lives would cross in unexpected ways. That's what I'm interested in the next two episodes. So we're going to talk about string theory and stuff like that. But first, let's talk about jazz. I love jazz. I love jazz because it's so alive in the moment. It has the excitement of something that's just been created. And it's unlike pop music and some rock music, except for live rock music. But jazz always feels like they just thought of it and it's going to be that way forever. And it's by chance that it's so great. And for instance, this is the first jazz record I ever bought. I can still listen to Miles Davis round about midnight and love it. And listen to him playing Bye Bye Blackbird. This is a great, great record. And I bought it in college because I didn't listen to jazz in high school. And later on in college, I had a roommate who loved John Coltrane. So I got introduced to Coltrane and a lot of avant-garde jazz. And soon found another Miles Davis album that really I played constantly. I have so many different versions of this. This is Miles Davis in a silent way. And this is one of the albums that reinvented jazz. As Miles does often say, I've changed the course of jazz 3 times. And what made Miles Davis great? He said it when someone said, Miles, how come you always hire the best musicians? And he said, I don't hire the best musicians. I hire the best listeners. Isn't that fascinating? Now, in the 70s, I got turned on to this movie, Cabin in the Sky, which has Ethel Waters and Duke Ellington in it. And I became a huge fan of Duke Ellington. I have many Duke Ellington records in my collection. He's wonderful. He's probably one of the greatest composers in American history. Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong and all of that. Now, what does that have to do with Fort Lee High School? Talk about chance. Talk about serendipity. These are the front steps of Fort Lee High School where you all hung out. You'd meet your friends after school or at lunchtime or before school, talk about stuff, and just hang out on the steps and sit. And sometimes as we were hanging out on the steps or we were in class, John Coltrane would drive by. Yes, and sometimes Miles Davis would drive by. He drove by for sure to make this record. Now, how do I know this? And where were they going? Well, Fort Lee High School was on Lemoyne Avenue. Here's Lemoyne Avenue. And they were driving up Lemoyne Avenue to 445 Sylvan Avenue. And that was where a recording studio was. Now, this information came to me by chance. I was reading the New York Times and there was an obituary for an engineer, a music engineer by the name of Rudy Van Gelder. And the name rang a bell. And I found out that a lot of interesting stuff about Rudy. He was the greatest recording engineer of all time. He made jazz music sound new and different. For instance, I asked T-Bone Burnett about it. And T-Bone said, before Rudy Van Gelder, the music was across the room from you. Rudy, through his use of miking and his sense of musicality and hi-fi and stereo, made it seem like you were in the middle of the music. And musicians used to say that Rudy made you feel more real than you really were. And they had a transparency and a musicality to his music. And this is Rudy Van Gelder. Now, here's the best part. Here's Rudy's story. Rudy started out as an optometrist in Hackensack, New Jersey, and he lived with his parents. He loved electronics. He was a geeky kid. He loved electronics, and he made his own stereo equipment and his own electronics equipment. And he talked his parents to letting him make a recording studio in their living room in Hackensack. And he was really good. And he started recording local people, and then word got out, and soon musicians from New York were making the trek out to Hackensack to record with Rudy, like this record, working with the Miles Davis Quintet, a great, important jazz record with John Coltrane on it, recorded in his living room. So Rudy kept this up for a bunch of years, till about 1959, where he realized that he could make a living being an engineer, and so he quit optometry, and he had a vision. He wanted to make a studio to his own specifications. He was fastidious about equipment. He never let anyone touch a microphone. He always wore white gloves in the studio. You couldn't bring food or drink into the studio, and if you were going to take a picture in the studio, he moved the mic so no one would find out how he placed them. And he built this studio a mile and a half from Fort Lee High School. That's right. Here's Rudy's studio in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey. And in this studio, he recorded 2,000 albums. Now, that's a lot of records. Back here, that's like 3,000. So think of 2/3 of that. And this is what it looked like on the inside. Like a church. And the reason for that is he felt that way about the music, that the music was holy. And he also realized that it gave the best sound. It's a very dry sounding room. And it made the music sound perfect. And he recorded up until the 70s and 80s and 90s. And then in the 90s, he remixed everything for CD. Thelonious Monk recorded much of the music on this record there. One of the classic jazz records, Tenor Madness. Sonny Rollins versus John Coltrane, recorded there. Saxophone Colossus, what a great name, Sonny Rollins, classic record. And speaking about religion, probably the greatest religious jazz record of all time, and certainly one of the greatest records ever recorded. And I was probably a mile and a half away in French class when John Coltrane made A Love Supreme there. Okay? Rudy Van Gelder, an obsessed man, just passed away, and just by luck, I found out how close he was to my life. I wish I'd known about it. I would have gone there. Okay. In doing the other chapters, I realized that I took a lot of chances in life, especially that last chapter, all the car stuff I pulled, and what a wild man I was. So what a reckless youth I was. So I went to the dictionary and the Thesaurus, and in the dictionary, I looked up reckless, and here's what it says. Reckless is an adjective without thinking or caring about the consequences of an action. Rash, hasty, heedless. So, one is not reckless alone. One has to have reckless friends, reckless youth. Here they are. Eddie Cohen, Teddy Cohen, wild men, reckless men. Two people I love very much, and we hung out for years and years and years. And first, I'm going to talk about Eddie. Like, for instance, just to give you an idea, there they are, wrestling with each other outside the school with George Doikas, another guy who later went on to become an anesthesiologist. Okay, so Eddie, this is Eddie's graduation picture. Eddie was very, very smart, and he moved to Fort Lee when I was in 7th grade. I think he came from Queens. His mother was a housewife, and his father was a machinist of the highest order. I think he was the foreman of the machine shop. And Eddie and I found out, and we bonded. We only lived 2 blocks apart, so we still walked to school together. We bonded over science, and he had a chemistry set, and I had a chemistry set. So we came to my house and combined our chemistry sets to do experiments that weren't exactly in the instructions, okay? Get the idea? Now, America was involved in a big science boom at the time, and everyone was very concerned about us losing ground to the Russians. And Eddie and I got caught up in this. We both loved science. We read everything about science in the library, and we used to collect Scientific American magazine and go into the city and buy back issues and read all the experiments. Sounds like fun, huh? Well, we were obsessed with this, and we collected all the experiments, and using this kind of leverage and catching up with the Russians, we talked our school, the intermediate school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, into letting us form a science club after school, which was really an excuse for us to use the equipment and play with all the chemicals and things there, because we had this whole thing of all these experiments we were going to try. And we started out slow. Things like taking white phosphorus out of the liquid, which, if you know anything, when phosphorus is at room temperature and taken it into the air, it reacts with the oxygen and sparks like a motherfucker. The next thing we did is we made hydrogen, right? Like in the Hindenburg, and set it on fire, big blue balls of flame. And then I stole some sulfuric acid from the school and put it in a bottle. And on the way home, the bottle opened, because I'd seen in the movies how the acid bubbled and everything. Well, it started bubbling all right. It burnt right through my pants and part of my leg. Failure, that experiment. The next experiment we did, well, it depends how you look at it. We made chlorine gas. The problem was we made a mistake, and we left the stopper in the gas collecting thing for too long and didn't have an out for it, and it blew up and sent noxious chlorine gas throughout the school. And they had to evacuate the school, okay? We learned a lot, okay? And that's what science is all about, the quest for knowledge. I think by the time we were in 8th grade, the school was really glad that we were graduating. And to send us on our way, they actually invented a science award from us called the Madame Curie Award for Scientific Curiosity. I think it was mostly glad that we hadn't blown up the school. Now, blowing up the school, does that ring a bell? Let's take another word. Impetuous, impulsive, because the thing that Eddie and I really liked about science was blowing shit up. Firecrackers. We go into the city and buy firecrackers. Firecrackers to us were like a snack. It was like potato chips. You'd light a firecracker whenever you felt like it, and pang, it would go off. It didn't mean much, except, if the other people didn't know you were going to light a firecracker. Like on Halloween, that was always a good thing. You would go to someone's house. Now, kids, don't try this at home, all right? I don't condone this. I'm just using this as an example of what not to do. So what it is, you go up to the front door, and you've got the firecracker in your hand and a lighter, and you ring the doorbell. When you hear footsteps, you light the firecracker and drop it and run, because if the door opens, bang, happy Halloween. So we did that. Now let's move up the scale to, if that's a snack, this is the appetizer. Cherry bombs. Now, cherry bombs, you gotta love the name, you gotta love the look. The Runaways did a song called Cherry Bomb. Great stuff. Now, basically a cherry bomb is a ping pong ball full of black powder. And it makes a big loud sound, and if you put it in one of your model cars and light up, boom, car is gone. A great thing also is to build a little airplane out of balsa wood or buy a cheap one, attach the cherry bombs, light it and send it in the air, gone. Or here's another one, kids. You get yourself an orange juice can, the kind for concentrate in it, get rid of the concentrate. But then you light the cherry bomb and put the can over it, back up, boom, 50 feet in the air. Cherry bombs are good, but they're not as good as this. This is the main course. The M80, huh? Does this look like a nasty piece of work? Now, M80s were called ash cans. The thing about an M80 that's great, aside from the firepower, is you can light them and put them in water and they blow up underwater. So, a good experiment to try is you light your M80, put it in the toilet and flush the water. You get a really nice charge if you don't blow the pipes. And, don't do it at homes. There are public places that are where the M80 should go off. Another thing which I want to warn you off doing is if you happen to find an abandoned car in the woods, for example, and you take off the gas tank and you light an M80 and put it in the gas tank, don't do that. Trust me, don't do that. Now, when you run out of this stuff, you run out of money, you got to make your own fireworks like these. These are not torpedoes from an American submarine. These are CO2 cartridges, the kind that you make seltzer with at home. And when they're empty, you can use objects from around the house, like match heads, and you stuff them full of match heads, put them on something to aim them, and you light them, and they go shooting away. Another good thing to do, and it's part of our race for space, is to take your toy rocket ship that you have and stuff it with 2 of these and lock them into place. Light them and back off, give it a 10, 9, 8, you know, light them, back off, and bang, this thing goes up in the air like a German V2 rocket over the London Blitz. Boom, they're gone. Now, we were very involved in science, and among the sciences that we were involved with was biology. And we learned a lot about evolution and survival of the fittest. And at this point, with our reckless action, we had to survive. We didn't want to be the species that didn't make it. We didn't want to be the part of the herd that was cold, okay? But there were things that tested that. And one day, walking home with our Twinkies and our Hostess snowballs, we found one of these. I tested our survival of the fittest. Imagine those 2 guys finding a bullet like this. I don't know which one it was, but it sure felt like this was one of them when I looked it up on the internet. And scientific minds met and decided we better take this home to my father's workshop. He had an 8x8 wood workshop, you know, in the house. And we put that bullet in a vise and tightened it. Now, this was a very safe wood shop because the walls were concrete, very hard. And we put that in there, and then one of us took a screwdriver and put the end of the screwdriver on the bullet, on the firing pin of the bullet, and the other took a hammer and on a count of 3, hit it on the back. And this high-powered, high-caliber bullet, bang, went shooting across the room and all around the walls in a vicious ricochet, taking chunks of concrete with it. But we lived. We survived. And that's how the world continues to be full of stupid teenagers who don't know their ass from a hole in the ground, because that's what we were at that point. But we got a little smarter, and we decided, since that experiment had worked and we'd survived that maybe we should try something bigger when we were in 10th grade. And we decided that the thing for us was to build an atom smasher. Atomic energy was big. So it was in Scientific American. So we learned about how to build an atom smasher, and we needed someone to help us build it. We needed someone who could machine parts, and that's what Eddie's father did for a living. So he got everyone in the machine shop to help us. Because one of the most important parts of an atom smasher is this. That's a cloud chamber. Now, the idea of an atom smasher is that you build up a lot of energy in a radioactive particle, and you send it through some magnets into this cloud chamber, which has smoke in it, and it irradiates something like metal. And in this case, a penny, okay? Now, it's called a cloud chamber because then you see the streaks of the high velocity electrons and protons or whatever it is that we were sending through there. But in order to get that kind of speed, and Eddie's father worked very hard on making us the parts. It wasn't as nice as this, but it was working. And you need something that'll send those electrons moving. You need 50,000 volts of electricity. You need a Van de Graaff generator, right? And that's what we were after. Now, the school, we said, we're future scientists of America. You guys got to rent us a Van de Graaff generator. And they did. And we hooked this up all together. I can't remember how we did it, but this was all connected. It was probably like this or something. And sure enough, we had to get radioactive particles, and we got them through the mail from Scientific American. It was a much different time then. There was a little more naivete. And we sent these radioactive particles through the air into the penny. We took the penny out, checked it with a Geiger counter. Success. It was radioactive. And we did 4 or 5 pennies with this. And we took these radioactive pennies down to the cafeteria, and we bought our milk with them. Our experiment, a success. Now, Eddie was the smartest guy in Fort Lee High School. There's no doubt about it. And he had the most wicked sense of humor. I mean, he and I thought Dr. Strangelove was like fantastic. We just laughed at everything. And we were sarcastic wise asses, you know, but we got along so great and we were such close friends. And he got 700s on his college board scores, and he got straight A's, and he ended up getting a full scholarship to Rutgers University, where he studied, you know, he majored in science and computer science. He's one of the first people to get involved with computer science and oceanography and marine biology. And he took all those things together, and he became someone who studied the ocean and mapped where the fish were in the ocean. In a word, Eddie used his scientific powers for good. Me, I use my scientific powers for evil. I just continued to blow shit up, you know. And Eddie and I stayed really close friends. He got married to Pam, and they had 2 sons. And he created this scientific program to follow all the fish off the Georges Bank in Massachusetts, where he lived. And that's where the majority of seafood comes from in America, codfish, whatever, and he could tell you which part of the year there's a number of fish, how to track them in the ocean. Basically, was one of the first people to scientifically approach ecology and revolutionize the fish business, you know, fish catching and so forth. And great guy. And sadly, though, in the late 80s, well, I have this memory of Eddie before I get to that, and you know, it wasn't all just about science. We were interested in girls, and so we're making that Atom Smasher, and we take a break, and we know we're going to a party that night. So we put on our favorite song, like this, Dion, The Wanderer, and we start dancing. I'm showing them dance moves, right? We're going round and round, and we're really involved in it. And we look up, and the most important part of our team, Eddie's father, is just standing there looking at us. And he says, "Future scientists of America, now we'll get back to work." It's, you know, it's Dion. We love Dion. It's that kind of memory of Eddie, you know, that I miss. He was a really interesting guy, but when he fell on that boat in the late 80s, he got bruised and it didn't heal. And he went to the doctor, and he was diagnosed with leukemia. And he had a bone marrow transplant, but it didn't work. And in 1989, Eddie passed away. And this is like the first of my friends to die. And here's a picture of Eddie from the early 80s. You know, kind of a typical pose with a beer in hand. Just a genius and great guy. And Eddie, I miss you. And in honor of you, let's talk about Dion a little bit. Dion DiMucci from the Bronx. Grew up on Belmont Avenue. Had some friends who also grew up on Belmont Avenue. And they met in grammar school and formed a group together. Get it? Dion and the Belmonts. This is a great record. This has something on it called Street Corner Serenade, which has every great doo-wop riff. And they were really good. And in 1957, when they were barely like 17 years old, they had a hit song with I Wonder Why. And then on with Lonely Teenager, The Wanderer, Run Around Sue. One hit after another. But Dion had a secret. And the secret was he had become addicted to heroin. And after 5 years of that, they kind of broke up the band, and he had to clean up his act. And he did. And he put his life back together. He must have had 30 or 40 hit songs over the years. He's a really great, great singer. And that voice, I mean, that voice has the empathy in it of like Frank Sinatra, Elvis. This is the music of my youth. When I hear this, it just takes me back. And if you really want to get into Dion, get this. This is a box set of all his works. And it's not just this kind of music. It's folk music. It's soul music. It's blues. And he really is a great interpreter of Springsteen. So the Dion and the Belmonts got back together again in the early 70s. Sold out Madison Square Garden. This is what they look like in the early days. And the sound of the crowd as they come out and start singing I Wonder Why, this is what they looked like then. Now, the good news is Dion's still here. He lives in Boca Raton. He's not retired, though. He's out there performing. He does about an album a year. He's 78 years old, and he's still out there performing. So, right on, Dion. Keep getting on there. I have everything you ever recorded. So I think we should take a break here, okay? Because we got a lot more rash, hasty, heedless behavior to study. All right, I'll come back. We'll talk about Teddy Cohen and the first TV show aimed at us. Because of the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, they let us have Shindig.